Hi, this is John Cullen, and welcome to another episode of Hypothetically Speaking. In this episode, we're going to talk to a gentleman from Ireland who the audience has been telling me comes to research on the coronavirus outbreak, the pandemic, in a very similar manner. And I kept getting a whole bunch of comments from the audience saying, you've got to meet this guy, you've got to talk to this guy, you've got to get him on your show, or let's get you on his show, or whatever. And the audience went after a gentleman by the name of Ivor Cummins. And so, Ivor, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here on the show. Welcome to Hypothetically Speaking with John Cullen.
Great stuff. Thanks a lot, John. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure and an honor to have you here. The audience brought your work to my attention and basically said, this guy is coming at this pandemic in a manner that's really similar to yours.
Ivor Cummins, who's co-author of a book called Eat Rich, Live Long. You've also got a blog called The Fat Emperor.
So when we push a very high carb food pyramid and the majority of your people are essentially diabetic, that's a challenge, shall we say.
This is one cartridge in a double-barrel shotgun, and you get to pull the trigger over 3.5 years.
If an engineering world had this scenario, we would never be allowed to survive. Not in complex problem solving. This thing we'd be all over it. It doesn't have to be cakes and biscuits. Bread is a highly processed carbohydrate product.
He's using a lot of math, he's using a lot of charts and data, right? And that's what we've been doing here. And so sort of as an introduction, I wanted the audience to understand a little bit more about your background. You have a background in science like I do, and this wasn't your bag of shells, right? You weren't an epidemiologist or an investigator of viruses. You were into health and chemistry and things like that. Can you tell my audience a little bit about your background? Assume you're talking to my mom and my dad, and they haven't seen any of your work. So would you tell the audience a little bit about how your journey got you to this?
Yeah, okay, John. Well, I'll try and keep it tight. So I did a biochemical engineering degree way back, finished in 1990, went into private industry, corporate medical device manufacturer development, and I quickly became a problem solver. So as an engineer, I would lead teams in problem solving the most complex multi-factor problems. So again, I always talked about data centricity. It's not about belief systems, it's about the data. Can you back it up with the data? So that was my nature.
The important thing to note is that, as per Professor Michael Levitt, in the northern temperate regions like Europe or North America, Northeast, you get a Gompertz curve. And the reason is because the virus, when it comes in new, it rapidly hits around 20% of the population. So around 80%, it's becoming clear, are already de facto immune through cross-immunity, T-cell, mucosal immunity from prior coronavirus in the large family of coronaviruses. It's got huge similarity, this SARS-CoV-2, to prior coronaviruses. So our immune system has many mechanisms to react.
So around 6-7 years in that, and then another 20 years in high volume manufacturing electrofluidic devices. But I just grew my career always by being the best problem solver and lead, and I ended up as a master technologist. So it's a very high level individual contributor. And I also spent around 15 years in management roles, people managing and all that side of the house, but always technical problem solving, specialists of all.
And today we're going to go through the UK mortality data. So a lot of people asking about this. And luckily I was contacted by Joel Smalley last week, who's done incredible analysis. And today we have not only Joel, we also have Dr. Claire Craig, a pathologist who has been doing incredible work and interviews online. And we also have Dr. Jonathan Engler, who's a biotechnologist.
We are using public source data. We haven't adjusted it at all. We're using data from the Office for National Statistics here in the UK and Public Health England here in the UK. Crucially, we are using data by date of occurrence, and we're focusing on mortality data.
So my key thing was integration, which we call it, and it's to have depth in all the fields required and breadth of all across them to integrate them into the true technical scenario. So I think the problem with this issue is, to deviate for a moment, we've got epidemiologists and they're people who have the tail of the elephant, and we've got virologists and they're feeling the trunk, and we've got immunologists, etc., but no one's integrating properly, in my mind. So my corporate career, I moved on around 8 years ago to health. I got blood tests that were very problematic, standard ones. 3 doctors in succession couldn't give me the answers. 2 key questions. A, what are the implications of these test results? Couldn't answer properly. And B, what do I do to resolve them, to fix the root causes? Again, no joy. So I researched them, and in 3 or 4 weeks, I discovered an incredible mountain of where we've been misled for decades on cholesterol and fat, but I won't go into that. So I spent 8 years on metabolic research. The root causes of modern chronic disease became my new career. And basically, I've gone through around 2,500 published papers.
This is why root cause analysis is a very useful and productive tool or technique in identifying and analyzing the problem, defining and eliminating the root cause, and validating that the corrective action also prevented recurrence of the problem. It is the objective of root cause analysis to improve the system and processes.
But to finish the story, after all of that, in March 2020, I looked at the data from Diamond Princess and coming out of China on the COPD and the heart disease, diabetes, and I had this thing figured. It's going to be like a severe flu. It's going to be heavily stacked towards the aged and frail, and this thing is getting hyped. No disrespect to the people who will suffer and pass, but the reality is, come on, this is going to pass. It's going to be gone in the summer in Northern Europe. It'll come back next winter, probably less, and then it's going to just be endemic. So all of the hype I couldn't understand. The people coming to me, talking about buying masks, talking about new normals. And long story short, when I got into it and they became obsessed with the China crisis lockdowns, and they ruined our society increasingly over the last 12 months, I got more and more engaged and more outraged. And here I am.
I understand. And you had a fairly successful practice already on YouTube. You had a pretty big following regarding nutrition and body chemistry and things like that. And you were just following that path when this hit, right? You were already doing podcasting and things of that nature, and this was not necessarily a direction you were headed, right? I mean, you hadn't investigated things like this in particular on your YouTube channel. You were doing health and nutrition and keto stuff and things like that. Am I right or am I wrong?
Absolutely right, John. So I was forced into this because the 2 things that drive me are, and straight to the camera, I have 5 children. I'm interested in population health and the future of our society for the next generation. I don't care about me. I'll die. We'll all die. But that's my big focus. And the second thing is technical truth. I've always had this quirk that I get very offended when the technical truth is twisted for politics. I don't mind manipulating, and I was a manager for years, but technical truth is kind of sacred. So those 2 things were offended very quickly in April last year into May, when the technical truth was being twisted beyond belief, and when they were literally destroying my society. The society for my children was getting ransacked, and the future was being threatened of our freedoms. So I just had no choice, and I risked my whole enterprise of metabolic health and my support from low-carb people because some of them did not like where I was going, but I didn't care because it was an imperative. Now, as it turned out, which I didn't predict or plan, I've gotten a lot of new support to replace some of my lost support, because so many people out there are awake to what's going on, and they want to support people like us, I guess, who are getting the data and the facts out. So I ended up okay. So I'm still being sustained, and I'm passionate as ever to keep at this.
Well, let's tell the audience where they can find you. If the audience wants to support your work, learn more about what you're doing, and contribute to the cause, do you have a Patreon page or a Subscribestar page that they can support your work?
Yeah, I got Patreon and I got a PayPal link. And if you just look up my YouTube channel, Ivor Cummins, the Fat Emperor, in most of my videos, in the description and at the end of the video, I kind of put those links. So, and all my materials essentially free, of course, on YouTube, etc. But my links are there.
That's great. So you're supporting a family. You've got a wife and 5 kids that you're supporting almost primarily or entirely now through Patreon. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would be the core support. So I finished my contract with the heart disease charity I was working with last March, and I was going out to be an independent, and it just happened to coincide with this thing. So I actually took the risk to hazard my Patreon launch and PayPal because of the importance of this. But as it turns out, yeah, people have been good and I've been supported.
Yeah, I did the same about 1.5 years ago. And I have 3 daughters of my own and 2 stepkids. And so I also have 5 kids. And yeah, we're in similar situations. I support my family off of Patreon. So for those of you who are watching, who are eager to learn more about Ivor's work, you can't believe how your $5 a month makes a huge difference, because it's the law of large numbers. And the audience knows I talk about that quite a bit. So, each of you, 10 of you, 20 of you contribute an extra $5 a month. It really does make a difference. So please consider going to Ivor's Patreon page and signing up and supporting his work, because he's coming at it in a manner that's very scientific, very similar to the way that we've been approaching it. So Ivor, thank you for sharing your background with the audience. Allow me to introduce myself. We didn't do much of a pre-call, so for the audience, so that you guys know, we don't spend a whole lot of time on the phone. We connect on Skype and we set up these connections and the presentations, and then we start recording. So Ivor doesn't really know my background, I don't think, right? You haven't really had a chance to research, to look at my videos. You just kind of heard about me. I guess somebody sent you an email? How did you learn about my work?
Yeah, well, exactly. I got an email and I had seen you, but there's so much material out there, as you can imagine, and I'm up the walls. I had seen clips and I was fascinated by the whole flu versus COVID in the USA, but I was only dabbling because I'm constantly juggling. But then someone emailed me and says, you got to get on this guy's show. And it was when I got the link and I clicked, I said, oh, I know that guy. But I didn't go deep into your stuff just because there's so much stuff going on. So this is super.
Oh, that's great. No, that's fine. All right, so let me sort of introduce myself to you. And see the map now, right? This is the Johns Hopkins map. A lot of people call this affectionately the panic map. And so by way of introduction, you and I have very, very similar backgrounds. Although I'm a little bit older than you. My background, back in 1984, when the Macintosh was introduced, I was one of the few Apple Lisa certified people in New York.
The way some business people spend their time has very little to do with a clock. At Apple, we understand that business as usual isn't anymore. That's why we make the most advanced personal computers in the world. And why soon there'll be just 2 kinds of people.
Hi.
those who use computers,
Yeah, I'll be home for breakfast.
and those who use apples.
So I've been in IT for a very, very long time. So that was 1984. So the day after, the NFL Super Bowl, I already had a Mac. I've been in this game for a long, long time. And back in the 1980s, I worked at Oracle for Larry Ellison.
Well, it's a dream come true for Larry Ellison off the coast of Spain on Sunday. The software billionaire managed finally to conquer the America's Cup and bring the trophy back to US shores. Lindsay Janis was there.
Ellison, the billionaire backer of the US team and himself a crew member in the winning race, is reveling in his victory.
And I'm especially proud to bring the America's Cup once again, after a long absence, back to the United States of America.
Any preconceived ideas of sailing should just go out the window. It's like a whole new sport. We're doing 45 knots of boat speed, which is just like lightning on the water.
Think things out for yourself. Come to your own judgments. Don't simply conform to conventional ways of thinking. That a lot of things are based on fashion. Even morality at times is based on fashion. It was once slavery was once not considered not to be immoral. People are shocked that the ancient Greeks had slaves, that we had slavery in this country as recently as 130, 140 years ago. So there are moral factors. You have to really go back to first principles and think things out for yourself, whether they're scientific principles or moral principles or business ideas or product ideas. You have to think things out for yourself.
The science of where. Getting data has never been easier. Understanding it, never more challenging. One answer? Map it, literally. When you put your data on a map, things happen. Patterns get clearer, relationships more obvious, and questions get answered. It's called location analytics. It provides answers about the where of your business. Whatever your source data, there's an easy way to start analyzing right away. GIS. It helps no matter what you do. You find where highest sales are and who buys a lot of designer shades.
Okay, the map that you see is a system that I built.
Oh, wow. So this goes back that far. I thought this was rustled up maybe during the Corona era.
It was.
To keep the panic going.
It was. I built the tool. I didn't build the map. I built the software that is presenting what you see. And a bunch of software guys working at Johns Hopkins University created this with the tool that I built 30 years ago. So the mapping system is software from a company called ESRI in California. And when I worked at Oracle, these guys wanted to connect data to maps. And everybody at Oracle thought they were nuts. We were like, what the hell are you doing? Maps and data. All right. And they wanted to buy the database, so we sold it to them. And
wow, that's so, and now it's ubiquitous. I mean,
it's
everywhere now is all these maps with data.
Yes. So, by profession, I'm a cartographer. Okay.
Indeed.
And they weren't planning on a cartographer who knows data double checking their math. All right, so you ready? All right, so you ready to get some goosebumps? You ready?
Oh yeah, let's go for it.
All right. This is going to change your world, and you didn't think you could get red pilled, but here we go. Where did the virus start? What do we call the virus? What's its nickname?
Oh, well, SARS-CoV-2.
Nickname by the President of the United States, the China virus.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so where did the virus originate?
Supposedly Wuhan, China.
Okay, and the WHO declared a global pandemic because of what? What was happening? The WHO declared a global pandemic because of what? People were dying in Wuhan, right? China was a disaster. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Tariq. Good afternoon, everybody. In the past 2 weeks, the number of cases of COVID-19 outside China has increased 13-fold, and the number of affected countries has tripled. There are now more than 118,000 cases in 114 countries, and 4,291 people have lost their lives.
From a relative perspective, the virus started in China, right? Relatively,
yeah.
Where does China rank in deaths?
Oh, it's extremely low. I mean, the whole region over there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What if I told you, or what if I showed you that there aren't 10 people dead in Shanghai or Beijing right now, today, from coronavirus?
Yeah, I don't have the geographical breakdown for China because I kind of moved focusing on Europe and America, but...
That was the illusion.
Yeah, China...
That was the illusion.
Okay.
Okay, so now I'm going to show you live. There aren't 10. That's what you've got a cartographer here. Okay? I'm going to show you right now, today, as you sit there. You don't need to have the data. You've got me. I know how to use the map. There aren't 7 people are dead in Shanghai as of today. 1,747 cases. 1,626 have recovered. 7 are dead. Why did the WHO declare a global pandemic if there weren't 5 dead a year ago when they did it? And that's Shanghai. Shanghai is 24.5 million people, and there aren't 7 dead. You have more people dead in Ireland than there are in Shanghai, but Shanghai has a population of 24.5 million people. So when I saw that, I got concerned, and I said, whoa, 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 you're using my map. Why is everything red? Why is everything red? What are you guys doing here? Why would you code Vietnam red if there's only 35 people dead in Vietnam out of a population of 100 million? There's more people in Vietnam than Germany. There's more people in Vietnam than the UK, and there's 35 dead. Is this due to their mask-wearing prowess? I have numbers. I have facts from the World Health Organization and from Johns Hopkins, right? And so what we do is we look at countries like Burma. So Myanmar has 54.4 million people. Okay? Mm-hmm. You're in Ireland. Roughly, what's the population of Ireland?
Oh, around 4.5 million. Would be way down.
Okay. So 4.5 million. There you are. 4.9. You guys have been busy. You've been busy. God bless you guys. All right, so 4.9 million in Ireland. Okay. And then we go to Myanmar. Okay. Now, Myanmar, if you were to compare their medical system to the medical system in Ireland, all things being equal, 54 million. So about 10 times your population, right? So now with 10 times the population, how is it that Burma, Myanmar, has fewer people dead? They've got 3,181 people dead in Burma. Now, if I go to see what does Johns Hopkins say about Ireland, let's go take a look at that. Oh, 3,794. So you have a couple more dead than, but they've got 10 times the population.
Yeah, and this is kind of crazy. Now, of course, they'll say it's lockdowns and masks and tracing, which is inherently absurd because
don't give them outs. Don't tell me what they're gonna say and make up their theory for them. You're doing their homework because there is no out. Nigeria has over 200 million people. There's fewer people dead in Nigeria than Ireland, Ivor. They have 200 million people. You telling me that Lagos's lockdown was that much more effective? What about Tanzania?
Tanzania's President John Magufuli has dismissed the benefits of vaccines and said no lockdown is planned in his country, as God will protect the people from COVID-19. Magufuli claimed homespun precautions such as steam inhalation were better than vaccines. Vaccines are not good, he said, adding that if they were, quote, the white man would have brought vaccines for HIV and AIDS. His views contradict global scientific consensus and advice from the World Health Organization.
But even as several countries rush to vaccinate their citizens against the deadly coronavirus, Tanzanian President John Pombe Magufuli has told his people, the Tanzanians, not to be wary or to be wary of the vaccines. Now, he said some of the vaccines introduced by foreign nationals were dangerous and should not be adopted. Magufuli was speaking in Gedo area in Tanzania today.
Unajifukizia huku unamuomba Mungu, unaswali, unasali, huku unapiga zoezi la kufanya kazi la kulima mahindi, kulima viazi.
Let's stand firm. This vaccine is not good at all. The government haven't published any coronavirus data for almost a year. Back then, the country officially had just over 500 cases and 21 deaths. President Magufuli has warned people only to report official information on the virus, and some activists have been arrested. On the streets of Dar es Salaam, many people still have faith in their president. We don't have coronavirus in Tanzania. If the country had the virus, the relevant ministry would issue a statement. But for now, people should stop being fearful and work hard.
Do you know that in Tanzania, they said we're not going to use the vaccine and we're going to use steam. We're going to use steam to treat people. There's only 21 people dead in Tanzania, Ivor. 21. Now we go to Cambodia and we go to Laos because it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. It's like, wait a second, Vietnam with 100 million people has 35 dead. You declared a global pandemic with less than 10 dead in Beijing and less than 10 dead in Shanghai. What about Cambodia? How many are dead there? No one. No one. All right. Is it the rice? Now, you're a nutritionist. Should we be looking at jasmine rice? There's no one dead in Laos. Ivor, nobody's dead in Laos. No one. Laos shares a border with China. all of the commerce between China and Thailand goes through Laos. Thailand and China don't share a border.
And Thailand itself is obviously extremely low. I can't remember.
So yeah. Thailand has the same population as France. There's 80 dead in Thailand. Okay, and then we go to France. France was a disaster, right? How many are dead in France?
Oh,
80,000. So with the same population, Ivor, there's 1,000 times more dead? I don't have a theory, Ivor. I just have math. That's all I have. And so my question to the World Health Organization is, isn't this worth further investigation? If you have a country that has 1,000 times fewer deaths with the same population, if Nigeria, with 200 million people, has fewer people dead than Arkansas, maybe the PCR tests aren't the problem.
Yeah, it's incredible because I did a simple world map a few days ago for a video, and I just showed that the areas you're talking about, like over on the right of the map, I put a huge oval, including China and Japan, and I said there's around 30 deaths per million claimed total. And then I put a huge oval over Europe, America, etc. And I said over here it's around 1,000 deaths per million.
Well,
so
that's why the audience wanted. The audience wanted to get us together because they knew you were this close and knocking on the door and looking through the windows and had a sense that you were, you were like this. You were literally this close. Now you're looking at the data. All right. So I want to show you another screen. Hang on. This epidemic, this global pandemic that they're declaring. As they're declaring it, there weren't 5 people dead in Shanghai or Beijing. And so I start looking around the world. Everybody says, okay, well, they're lying. So I look at Tokyo, Japan. I look at Japan. I look at Korea. I look at Vietnam. And I start asking, so wait a second. If we look at different states, I'm looking at Minnesota a week ago. I had a doctor on the show. There's more people dead in Minnesota than Japan, right? I'm making these kinds of comparisons. I was like, well, there's 120 million people in Japan. There's not 120 million people in Minnesota. Alabama has more people dead with COVID than China, than Nigeria, than Ethiopia, than Japan, than Myanmar, Kenya, Korea. These are huge countries. Alabama's not that big a place. How does the CDC, how do they explain this? So I go to the CDC. I'm an Oracle guy. And I go to the data. And what do we find? I start breaking down the comorbidities. And hidden in plain sight is the #1 comorbidity. I then start breaking it down by age. And we start looking at, well, who's actually dying? And so my obsessive compulsive focus was on deaths. Not hospitalizations, not cases, not vaccinations, not testing. Deaths. And the reason is, if COVID didn't cause people to die, would we have shut down the airlines?
I agree, and I always focus equally. There's another similarity on death, because in this whole thing, the hospitals have essentially never been overrun across the whole world, even in the most affected countries. So death is the only reason you would take exceptional measures. Lots of death, massive death, is the only reason you would do any of these measures. You can never say it's long COVID or it's just pressure on the hospitals, because you can easily build more capacity and cross-train staff. That's what you would do. You would not destroy the economy and freedoms and our society. The only way you would do those things is in extreme death. So I agree 100%.
And that's it. And that's why we've stayed focused on who's dying, where are they dying, and are there ways to put the dead into groups that make some sense so that we can figure out, are there groups of people who are dying more than other groups of people? And in the United States, there seems to be this, I don't know, there's a predisposition to look at things like race and nationalities and black people and Hispanic people and things like that. And I look at it from a different perspective, and I want to share that with you. One of the ways that I've been looking at it is age. And so when we looked at how many people are dying from which age groups, my work started to get cited by Laura Ingraham, who's the host of Fox News in the USA. She's a big broadcaster. And so when she started to cite my work, other big names and doctors and nurses and people in the field started to pay really close attention. And so the net of this is by age and by age group and who is dying. And if we start to look at these different age groups, are there other ways that we can break down these deaths, right, by population? So we look at population size and we look at how many people are dying. And it turns out that although we've got many, many more young people, there's not that many of them dying. It's when we get to the people who are 65, 75, 85 and older that there's not that big a population, but that's where people are dying. So although we talk about knowing that it affects the elderly, we don't really know to the extent. And so my audience and I have been researching not only COVID, but we also started to research other pandemics. And we started to research the 1918 Spanish flu rather extensively. We then started to look at chromosomes. I'm afraid to use the term gender on YouTube, so I don't care how I don't care how you identify. I care what chromosomes you were born with. So on the day of your birth, if you were born with XX or XY, that's all I'm referring to here. So this is science stuff. Twice as many men are dying as women in the United States. I can't speak for Ireland, but in the United States, twice as many men are dying as women. Now, if it was twice as many women that were dying as men, I think men would say, well, give the women the shots. Let's get them inoculated. If this thing is killing twice as many women as it's killing men, ladies, let's get you taken care of. But that's not what's happening.
Yeah, and it varies, but again, more men get heart disease death than women, and there's lots of theories, we won't get into that, but metabolic health, men can be worse off, maybe more susceptible in a general sense.
Again, I don't explain it. I don't explain it.
I'll just pop it.
Just data. Pure. And by the way, these are death certificates. These are deaths. So all things being equal in a large population of people who have good nutrition and bad nutrition. You've got a large population of people here. Some eat well, some don't. Some exercise, some don't. All things being equal, twice as many men are dying as women, period. I don't have an explanation. I don't need to come up with one. Epidemiologists in the CDC and the WHO and the National Institute of Health and Health and Human Services and NIH, they owe us the explanation. Our work is done here. This is what you and I do. We do this. Now the experts owe us an explanation. So wait a second. You guys are telling me that for infants in the United States, there's only 39 dead. You're telling me that children 1 to 4 years old, there's only 21. You're telling me from 5 to 14, there's only 58 kids in the United States that are dead and you closed all the schools? Now, I'm not going to explain it. They're going to explain it. I want explanations for this. You closed every school, and now you want how many billions of dollars to reopen? When I look at 15 to 24-year-olds in the United States, there's only 500 and something, 600 something dead. So the population distribution of the disease or of the dying is skewed so heavily towards the elderly, yet they're locking down the young. I'm not going to give them their explanation. I'm going to demand one. That's all. I want you to see this so that you now are armed. I'm basically giving you another weapon. Right? You've been doing your thing, and I just showed up with a Gatling gun. And you didn't even know we had those. And you're like, holy moly, you mean I get to add this to my quiver? I get all this data now because this is coming from the United States CDC. This is coming from Health and Human Services in the United States. They're providing this data. This is what I'm charting. It's coming from their website. And the fascinating thing is, these dummies also told us how many people don't have the flu. Now, you and I both have a background in root cause analysis. Okay? We both want to get to the heart of the matter. The heart of the matter for me is, why are people dying? That's it. That's it. When you start getting into the test kits are this, and this isn't that, and this wasn't purified. Yeah. Why are people dying? There's 10 million active infections in the United States. Can I save somebody's life today? That's all I care about. I get the whole test kit thing. I get it. How do I save somebody's life? What if I told you that more than half of the people who are dying with COVID also had tuberculosis? Would that matter?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to get really interesting now for sure. But just before we go into it, I'll just mention a couple of bits of data, no theories.
Go ahead.
Just like you say.
Yeah, do it.
In Ireland, in the epidemic last year, the actual epidemic phase, around 95% of the people who died, of all deaths from COVID or with COVID, were never given an ICU treatment. In other words, they were already so comorbid or close to the door that it was not ethical to even attempt to save them. That's 19 out of 20 of the deaths were already in that state.
All right.
Isn't that just unbelievable?
So here comes more goosebumps for you. And I'm going to show you why. And you're not going to believe it because it's really kind of far out there. But as you dig in and you look deeper and deeper, you're going to go, holy mackerel, this is crazy. So think conceptually. If you found out after the fact that all these people that have died also had tuberculosis, hypothetically, and you're like, what? They came into the hospital with COVID. They were coughing. They had a fever. What does tuberculosis look like?
Yep. I mean, any of these respiratory problems will look similar. A lot of overlap.
Close enough, right? Close enough that if somebody came into the hospital with symptoms, were they tested for tuberculosis? No. Now, hang on. Hypothetically, if we find out after they've passed from the coroners that they tested positive for tuberculosis and COVID, both, would that be relevant?
Of course, you have to decide the prominent or the biggest cause of death, or it might be shared. But either way, if that was the case, you'd have a massive tuberculosis problem going on, which you'd have to share the attention of the media with.
Mm-hmm. All right, so that's our hypothetical. The hypothetical is it's tuberculosis. Let's say it's hantavirus. Would that be relevant? Would that be something we'd want to talk about if we found out that more than half the people who died with coronavirus also had hantavirus? Right? We would say that seems relevant, right? If it turned out that half of them had rotavirus, we would say, well, that sort of seems relevant too, doesn't it? So if more than half of the people had H1N1, is that not relevant? If they had the Spanish flu and coronavirus, is that not relevant? I'm trying to figure out why it wouldn't be. Why would we not want to talk about that? Would that be a secret? And why would that be a secret? Why would it be a secret that more than half of the people who are dying with coronavirus also have influenza? So I start looking into influenza, and I go into the influenza mortality system. I say, okay, while everybody's over here panicking about coronavirus, how many people are dying from influenza? What's happening over here? Yeah. I see the show. I see the show you're putting on. I see what you want me to look at. You want me to look at Italy. You want me to look in France. You want me to look at Spain. I'm looking in Vietnam. I'm looking in Cambodia, and I'm looking in Laos. I'm looking in Thailand and Mongolia, and nobody's dead. What are you guys up to? Let's see what you're doing with the flu. So I go to Florida. I go to California, and I see that influenza is peaking, but I'm looking at deaths. I'm not looking at doctors testing patients when they come in. I'm looking at death certificates. And as I start looking at death certificates, what I'm finding is that of the people who are dying with coronavirus, more than half of them also have influenza.
Now, is this a subpopulation that gets an extra assessment? I mean, these hundreds of thousands of people, 350,000, they're not all getting tested for influenza. I'm guessing this is a sample from coroners who have done extra testing, or is it? Just to clarify.
No, when someone dies and there's a death certificate, the coroners, I guess, draw blood. I mean, I'm not a medical examiner, so I don't really know, but this data that I'm charting is coming from the mortality system, which is from coroners. It's exactly what it says. This is where it comes from. And what they're doing is they're telling you the comorbidities. So I said, well, let's start with influenza. And they made it real easy because on this table that they gave us here, they tell you who doesn't have influenza. So if they give you a big number, let's say they give you a number of 450,000 people who are dead, and then they tell you 200,000 of them don't have influenza, what would you derive from that?
Well, yeah, the balance 250 do, unless, I suppose, if they screwed up or they've made a mistake in their database or something.
So that's why I go to the flu system itself that's been in tracking for 9-10 years. That has nothing to do with coronavirus. It was built years ago, long before coronavirus, and people have been using it for years to track influenza deaths, what's called P&I deaths, right? So the other thing that starts happening is you start to see this press stuff coming out saying, well, did COVID kill off the flu? And people start saying, you know, how did that happen? Right? Did the flu disappear? Now, are you seeing a whole lot of flu deaths in Ireland right now? Like, what has happened to influenza in Ireland?
No, worldwide and in Ireland, flu has dropped off the map. Now, they have dropped their testing for flu, like PCR style, but the percentage positives has dropped off the map. That's generally the data. I guess they may put pneumonia also on a death cert, but they're not putting influenza with a test verifying the virus on death certs. It appears to have fallen away.
All right. Back in October, I published a paper. I found a paper that the CDC had published saying that influenza levels have been reduced dramatically in Australia, Chile, South Africa, and the USA. And this was published by the CDC. And what I had been looking at was the WHO's data. And so when I saw this paper from the CDC saying that influenza activity during the COVID pandemic is dramatically reduced on Australia, Chile, and South Africa, I jumped on it. And the reason was they stopped reporting after Australia, South Africa, and Chile. Well, what about all these other countries? What about influenza in all these other countries? There's 180 other countries we need to talk about. How did influenza stop within 3 weeks in every country on Earth? How did that happen? This is according to the WHO. This is according now I'm not at the CDC. Now I'm at the World Health Organization. This is where the goosebumps come. So it's one thing if the United States is over-reporting. It's another thing when Switzerland doesn't have any flu cases since April of 2020. It's another thing when Thailand has no flu cases since April 2020. Ukraine, United Arab Emirates, Turkey. How'd you pull that off, Tedros? Did the fax machine break? So there's no reporting on influenza anywhere in the world. This is United Kingdom and Northern Ireland. Look, this is influenza, 500 cases a week. Over 1,000 in that first week. And then what happened in week 12? Poof, it went away. That's amazing. Look at this. This is amazing.
This has fascinated me, and I haven't had time to get into it enough. But it's just that if you try to think of an explanation that's not subterfuge or questionable, you might go to the history of when a new dominant virus comes in, sometimes other viruses drop out of the system because of viral interaction. But that's searching for a reason.
That's right. They have to prove it.
There's no way it's.
That's right.
There's no way it's the distancing or the masks, because all of these countries, it's disappeared, and there's a massive range in whether they're doing measures or not like that. So there's no way. And track and trace, the countries like Thailand who are not doing, lockdowns so much,
Nigeria, Tanzania,
they say, well, they did track and trace.
Tell me about Nigeria.
Wasn't for flu.
What about Nigeria? What about Tanzania?
Yeah.
What about Laos? What about Cambodia? Their explanations are nonsense, and I will not be gaslighted. You cannot gaslight me with nonsense explanations. It's not going to work. I built the map. I see what's happening. Why was the map red when no one was dead? Are you trying to scare everybody? Why would you do that? And why is there this thing called influenza burden when we have a list of how many died? So if we have the coroner's reports on how many people died, why does the CDC insist on this thing called influenza burden? So they say 22,000, the death rate or influenza burden in 2020 was 22,000. But influenza burden is a complicated formula. The number of people who actually died was 273, almost 274,000, according to the CDC's mortality system. So this is the sort of illusion nonsense that these guys are doing. They come up with new definitions of things. They come up with new terminology. They then come up with a formula, a calculation, and they call it influenza burden. And they tell you it's 22,000 deaths is influenza burden. But influenza burden's a calculation. I just go get the data. I just go get how many died each week. I don't care about hospitalizations, hospital beds, utilizations, physician visits. I'm not dividing anything by anything. I just want to know how many died. I'm not looking for a factor. And in this season, right now, there's over 150,000 dead. So I talked about the Spanish flu. We went back to 1918 and said, well, wait a second. Didn't that thing have cytokine storms also? And it turns out that the United States, Dr. Fauci, the NIH, and the CDC thought it would be a good idea to go to Alaska and dig up some dead World War I soldiers, take out some lung tissue, and genetically sequence the Spanish flu. And they did this in 2005.
And you can think of flu in 1918 and otherwise like that garbage can or like a shot to the ribs. It lands you on your back for a few weeks. It creates inflammation, fluid buildup in your lungs where you need them clear for oxygen, for gas exchange. And pneumonia is really, really deadly. It always has been, and it still is. And that's what killed people in 1918. The other clue is that it was an H1N1 virus. And so how do we know that? We know that because people like Jeff Taubenberger and his team have actually gone back to tissue samples from 1918. So here we have wax-embedded autopsy tissue samples taken from a victim of the Spanish flu. And Jeff Taubenberger and his team take slices of that material and they amplify up that genome that we saw before. So we know exactly genetically what this thing looked like. In fact, the one complete genome that we have from 1918 comes from here. So this is a place called Brevik Mission, which is a little village in Alaska. And in 1918, the Spanish flu pretty much wiped out the whole village. And a lot of people ended up in mass graves. And this guy here, Johan Hultin, he's a virologist who for years had been saying, you know, we might be able to get virus out of those graves. If they were buried in permafrost, you might have good preservation of material. He tried in the 50s, at a time before genomics and amplifying gene sequences. What he needed to do then was actually get a live virus. Couldn't do it. Not possible. Everything's kind of dead and fragmented. So he went back in the 90s on a solitary trip. I thought this was funny. So he carried just one tool, a pair of garden clippers borrowed from his wife without permission. And let me just go back. There they are. Okay. So from this mass grave, via Mrs. Hultin's garden clippers to the big screen, that's not just a flu genome. That is the Spanish flu genome from that victim, from that mass grave in Alaska. Those A's, C's, G's, and T's are the virus that killed that person and so many others in 1918. And I can
Michael.
Yeah, Rich.
So on that one slide showing the strains circulating through humans through time, at the end you had the H3N2 and you had the H1N1 and it said H1N1 lab escape. H1N1 and it said H1N1 lab escape.
Yeah, so I thought someone might ask about that. So in 1957, the Spanish flu like H1N1 went extinct when H2N2 emerged. In 1968, H3N2 kicked out H2N2. But in 1977, there was a kind of mini pandemic, and H1N1 reemerged. And bottom line is, if you look at the molecular clocks, it was frozen in time, not even since 1957, but it was a 1950 H1N1 strain. And it's virtually certain that it was an accidental escape, probably from an experimental strain from China or Russia. And so, yes, the worst pathogen in human history was accidentally re-released, and not too many people know about it until you guys.
See, I've been a bad man.
like me now? How you 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 like me now? Remember the time, hey, when I eat you up. You know, yeah, I was alive. Oh, baby, must know the kind of line I mean. Hey, so if I was to cheat, oh Lord, would you see right through me? I know if I sing a sad song, would you give it to me? I know, baby. Hey, so how you got me now? How you like me now? How you like me now? How you like me now? But how you like me now? How you like me now? How you like me now? But how you like me now? Is that